And so the Russians did pull forces out that were more or less engaged in positional warfare. But they didn't pull any of the maneuver forces, the forces that are actively maneuvering against Ukraine. They all stayed engaged. They all still have their, ammunition supplies, their fuel allocations. They are operating according to plan. The Kursk invasion didn't disrupt the Russian offensive operations at all. Russia pulled troops out of Belarus, including some former Wagner units. Russia has brought in troops from other parts of Russia, and Russia has deployed reserves that it was holding for the Donbass operation and brought them in. But the people say, well, that's a victory. Well, it's not.
Welcome to a pivotal moment in history where we witness the mighty Russian forces delivering a blow so devastating that it leaves Ukraine and its Western backers reeling. Mr. Scott Ritter has long warned of this outcome. In just a matter of days, the Russian army has unleashed a lightning-fast offensive that has torn through Ukrainian defenses like a hot knife through butter. This is not just a military campaign, it's a masterclass in strategy and power. Russia, having meticulously planned and prepared for this very moment, is now executing with unparalleled precision. The speed and efficiency of the Russian advance have caught the entire world by surprise, and what we're seeing is nothing short of a military triumph that will be studied for years to come. The Western media, in their typical fashion, have downplayed these advances, hoping to spin the narrative in Ukraine's favor. But the reality on the ground is undeniable. Russian forces are not just advancing, they are dominating. The Ukrainian military, despite the billions in Western aid and the endless flow of weapons, is crumbling under the pressure. This is the real story, the one they don't want you to see. As we break down this stunning advance, let's first dive into the heart of the battle at Avdiivka, where Russian might has reshaped the battlefield overnight. 2 days ago, the Russian military demonstrated its unmatched strength with a ferocious assault on Avdiivka. The scale of destruction and the speed of the advance were nothing short of spectacular. Inspector Scott Ritter's earlier assessments about the vulnerability of Ukrainian defenses have proven to be spot on. Ukrainian forces, unprepared and overwhelmed, lost over 20 square kilometers of territory in a flash. Let's be generous and say 15 square kilometers. The so-called fortified positions crumbled as Russian troops surged forward, taking control of key strategic points like Sviriduivka and Ivanivka with surgical precision. This isn't just a setback for Ukraine, it's a complete and utter rout. The Ukrainian defenders, who had been hyped up by their Western sponsors as formidable fighters, have proven to be little more than a speed bump for the Russian war machine. What's particularly humiliating for Ukraine is how quickly their lines have collapsed. These were areas that Ukraine and its Western advisors claimed were impregnable, yet they fell within hours. The Ukrainian forces didn't even have time to regroup before they were forced to retreat, abandoning their positions in a desperate attempt to avoid encirclement. And let's not forget the Ukrainian civilians who had been caught in the crossfire, abandoned by their own government, which is more interested in pleasing its Western masters than protecting its own people. These are the real victims of Ukraine's reckless decision to engage in this unwinnable conflict. But this is only the beginning of Ukraine's nightmare. Let's shift our focus to Novotorotsky, where Russian forces continue to steamroll through Ukrainian defenses with breathtaking speed. Yesterday marked another day of triumph for Russian forces as they advanced into Novotorotsky, tightening the noose around Ukrainian positions. Inspector Scott Ritter has consistently highlighted the strategic importance of such maneuvers, predicting the very outcomes we are now witnessing. The so-called valiant defenders of Ukraine were left scrambling as Russian troops stormed into the village, pushing ever closer to the heart of Ukrainian-held territory. Reports from the battlefield confirm what we've all been expecting. Ukrainian forces are in full retreat, unable to stem the tide of Russian dominance. Avdiivka is now a battleground, and let's face it, Ukraine is running out of options. The capture of Novotorotsky is more than just a tactical victory, it's a symbol of Russia's growing momentum. Ukrainian forces, already stretched thin and demoralized, are finding it increasingly difficult to hold their ground. The Western powers, who have poured billions into Ukraine's war effort, must now face the harsh reality that their investment is yielding diminishing returns. The Ukrainian army, despite being bolstered by Western weapons and training, is proving incapable of withstanding the Russian onslaught. This raises serious questions about the sustainability of Ukraine's war effort, questions that the Western media are conveniently ignoring. Let's not forget the strategic importance of Novotoretsky. Its capture by Russian forces not only weakens Ukraine's defensive lines, but also opens up new avenues for further Russian advances. The psychological impact of this victory cannot be underestimated. As news of the Russian advance spreads, it will undoubtedly sow panic among Ukrainian troops and their Western advisors, who are already struggling to maintain a coherent strategy in the face of overwhelming Russian pressure. As the Russian forces press on, the implications of this overwhelming momentum become increasingly clear. Let's explore what this means for the broader strategic landscape. What we're witnessing is not just a series of battles, but the complete unraveling of Ukrainian defenses. The fall of Orlivka overnight marked a significant turning point. Russian forces, executing a flawless campaign, seized an additional 15 to 20 square kilometers, erasing Ukrainian presence from key locations like Zhuravka and Mykolaiivka. It's almost amusing to watch as the Ukrainian defenses touted by the West as impregnable are being dismantled piece by piece. As Inspector Scott Ritter has noted in his analyses, Ukraine's overextended lines were always vulnerable to a concentrated Russian strike. This isn't just a defeat, it's a catastrophe for Ukraine. The rapid collapse of these key areas reveals the deep flaws in Ukraine's military strategy, a strategy dictated by Western powers who are more interested in using Ukraine as a pawn in their geopolitical games than in actually helping the Ukrainian people. The Western media, always eager to paint Russia as the aggressor, conveniently ignore the fact that Ukraine's reckless offensive operations have led to this disastrous outcome. The so-called counteroffensive that Ukraine has been boasting about for months has turned into a counterproductive disaster, leading to the loss of vital territories and the lives of countless Ukrainian soldiers. But the real question is, how much longer can Ukraine sustain this level of loss? With every passing day, it becomes clearer that Ukraine's military is being bled dry, its resources stretched to the breaking point. The Western powers, so quick to promise aid and support, have yet to deliver on their grand promises, leaving Ukraine to face the full might of the Russian military machine alone. And what of the Ukrainian leadership? They continue to parrot the same tired lines about victory and resistance, even as their country crumbles around them. With the Ukrainian lines shattered, the next move by Russian forces will likely seal the fate of this region. Let's take a closer look at the strategic brilliance behind Russia's campaign.
The
Russian strategy is a stroke of genius executed with precision that leaves Ukraine and its Western handlers baffled. By securing critical positions like Serhivka and Zelan, Russian forces have effectively isolated Ukrainian units, leaving them helpless and unable to respond. Inspector Scott Ritter, who has been closely monitoring these developments, has emphasized the efficiency and foresight of the Russian military in outmaneuvering the Ukrainian forces. The Western media might try to spin this as a setback, but the truth is clear: this is a decisive Russian victory, and it's only going to get worse for Ukraine. The so-called Ukrainian counterattacks are nothing more than desperate attempts to stave off the inevitable. What's particularly impressive about the Russian strategy is its ability to adapt and outmaneuver the Ukrainian forces at every turn. Russian commanders have shown a remarkable ability to exploit weaknesses in the Ukrainian defenses, launching surprise attacks and cutting off key supply routes. This has left the Ukrainian forces in a state of constant confusion, unable to predict where the next Russian blow will fall. The Western advisors who have been guiding Ukraine's military strategy must be scratching their heads, wondering how things have gone so disastrously wrong. But this is no accident. The Russian military has been meticulously planning this campaign for months, if not years. Every move has been calculated, every contingency prepared for. The result is a series of lightning-fast advances that have left the Ukrainian forces in disarray, scrambling to react to a situation that is rapidly slipping out of their control. And let's be clear, this is not just about capturing territory. This is about breaking the will of the Ukrainian military, demoralizing their troops, and showing the world that Russia is not to be trifled with. With Ukraine's defenses crumbling under the weight of Russian strategy, the larger implications of these defeats are starting to come into focus. Let's explore what this means for the future of the conflict. The writing is on the wall. Ukraine is on the verge of losing Donetsk entirely. The so-called strategic depth that Ukraine once boasted of is now nothing more than a rapidly shrinking buffer. As Russian forces close in on Pokrovsky, let's be clear, if Ukraine loses Pokrovsky, it's game over for Donetsk. Inspector Scott Ritter has pointed out the critical importance of this region, predicting that its fall would mark a turning point in the conflict. This isn't just a loss of territory, it's a catastrophic defeat that will reverberate across the entire conflict. And what are the Western powers doing? Watching from the sidelines, offering empty promises while Ukraine's glorious resistance crumbles to dust. What's truly astonishing is how the Ukrainian leadership, along with their Western backers, have completely misjudged the situation.
Warfare.
They believed that by focusing on peripheral areas like Kursk, they could draw Russian forces away from the main battlefronts. But this strategy has backfired spectacularly. Instead of weakening Russia's grip on Donetsk, it has only strengthened it. The Ukrainian forces, spread too thin and lacking coherent leadership, are now facing the very real prospect of losing one of their most vital regions. Let's also talk about the economic and psychological impact of losing Donetsk. This is not just a military loss, it's a blow to Ukraine's economy and its national pride. Donetsk is a region rich in resources and industrial capacity. Losing it means losing a significant portion of Ukraine's economic power. And the psychological impact on the Ukrainian population cannot be underestimated. The fall of Donetsk will send shockwaves through the country, demoralizing the population and eroding support for the war effort. As the fall of Donetsk becomes more likely with each passing hour, it's clear that Ukraine's missteps have brought them to the brink. But the story doesn't end here. Let's turn to the real folly of this conflict. And then there's the farcical situation in Kursk region, so irrelevant that even its inhabitants would be hard-pressed to care about it. Yet, Ukraine, in a move that defies logic, has poured resources into a futile campaign there, ignoring the critical fronts where the real battle is being fought. It is Inspector Scott Ritter, who has long criticized Ukraine's strategic decisions, would undoubtedly see this as yet another blunder in a series of missteps. What's the end game here? To win a few square kilometers of wasteland while losing the urban and economically vital regions of Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia? This is the kind of strategy that only a puppet regime dictated by clueless Western advisors could concoct. The decision to focus on Kursk is not just a military blunder, it's a strategic disaster. Ukraine, already stretched thin and facing mounting losses on the main fronts, has diverted valuable resources to a region that offers no significant strategic advantage. The Western advisors who have been guiding Ukraine's military strategy must be either completely incompetent or utterly indifferent to the fate of the Ukrainian people. The only explanation for this madness is that Ukraine's leadership is more concerned with pleasing their Western sponsors than with winning the war. But what's even more troubling is the message this sends to the Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines. These are men and women who are risking their lives, fighting in some of the most brutal conditions imaginable. And yet, their leadership is squandering resources on a pointless campaign in Kursk, leaving them to fend for themselves in the critical battles that will determine the outcome of this war. It's a betrayal of the highest order, and it's one that will not be forgotten. With Ukraine's focus so disastrously misplaced, the next phase of the conflict will be decisive. The question now is not if Ukraine will fall, but how quickly. As we conclude this report, it's clear that the Ukrainian defense is in free fall, and there's no cavalry coming to the rescue. Inspector Scott Ritter's analyses have consistently pointed to this very outcome, a scenario where Ukrainian forces, stretched thin and mismanaged, are unable to withstand the might of the Russian military. The Russian offensive, executed with unmatched precision and power, has torn through Ukrainian lines, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. The Western powers, so eager to cheer from the sidelines, are now conspicuously silent as their proxy falters. The fall of Donetsk is imminent, and with it, the end of Ukraine's futile resistance in the east. The only question that remains is how much longer can Ukraine hold on before the entire house of cards comes crashing down? The Western narrative of a glorious Ukrainian resistance is unraveling before our very eyes. The reality is that Ukraine is losing, and it's losing badly. The billions of dollars in aid, the endless supply of weapons, the endless stream of Western propaganda, none of it has been enough to stop the Russian advance. And now, as the fall of Donetsk looms on the horizon, the world is beginning to see the truth: Ukraine's war effort is collapsing, and there is nothing the West can do to save it. Let's also consider the broader geopolitical implications of this collapse. As Ukraine's defenses crumble, the balance of power in Eastern Europe is shifting. Russia is emerging not just as a military power, but as a geopolitical force that cannot be ignored. The West, for all its bluster and posturing, is being shown up for what it is: an empire in decline, unable to project power or influence in a meaningful way. The fall of Donetsk will be a turning point, not just in this conflict, but in the broader struggle for global influence. As the conflict continues to evolve, stay tuned for more updates. The outcome of this war is becoming increasingly clear, and it won't be long before the final chapter is written.